Thank you very much, Jamie. Thanks. Very happy to be here to join all of you. Is everybody having a good time? Excellent. That's really good. I like to come to these things. I've been coming to them for a very long time, obviously. And one of the things I always like to comment on is when I was young, I always wanted to be old, because when I was a young researcher, all of my clients would look at me and say, that young whippersnapper, how can he know anything? He's still wet behind the ears. He doesn't know anything. And then now that I'm old, I wish I was that young whippersnapper so people would think I was innovative and aware of the new techniques and the new approaches that are going on today. So it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition. But one of the things I can say is that I've always been passionate about research, and I've always been passionate about consumer decision making. One of the other things I've always been passionate about is simplicity. And simplicity is something that we recognize and follow as a firm on a very regular basis. So we do this annual study on simplicity. We evaluate companies on a wide range of industries. Typically what we'll do is we'll ask for simplicity about various industries, and then we'll focus on individual companies within the various industries. And we do this because we found that our clients really want direction in terms of how do they avoid kind of the complexity that you end up with if you're just apathetic about it, and create remarkably fresh and unexpectedly clear responses and brand positions. The study is done in 8 different countries around the world. We have over 12,000 respondents, roughly 1,750 for each individual country, and over almost 600 brands are evaluated because the brands are specific to each individual country. Many of the brands do cross countries, as you'll see when I present my results here. And you'll see that we cover a lot of other interesting things too. We cover disruptors, for example. There's a lot of interest in disruptive technologies, and one could say that the reason why they're disruptive is because they've made things simple for people. They've reimagined the process. They've put the customer in charge. They've taken away the pain points. When you think about Starbucks, Uber, even Google for that matter, that's what these companies do. They make things simple, and they're based on a brand experience that's extraordinary and second to none. And you'll see that in the results of our study. I'm only going to go over some of them, and I'll give you a link that you could go to, and you can see the results from each and every country and everything that we've got. Is that fair enough? So I'm not asking for anything, not selling anything. It's a nice exchange of information. So what's the key to building a better brand? And obviously I've talked a lot about that. It's simplicity. You really want to have something that people intuitively understand, that they intuitively react to. Think about when Apple really exploded. It was because it was intuitive, it was easy, they made things simple. Now they're starting to run into a little more difficulties. There's a little more competition. They're trying to expand into new areas, and how do they make that simple? Think about how fast it was for us to adopt an Apple iPhone when we're not really used to one. And now smartphones are everything. We couldn't live without them. So that was really the first really tangible example from Apple, but there are lots of other ones. I worked with BMW in the early 1990s when we were going through some issues, as we usually do with gas crises and other things, and BMW was wondering, who are we as a company? You know, they'd already had the ultimate driving machine tag out there, and yet they had a BMW 320e model. The E stood for economy. BMW should never stand for economy. When I was working with them, we began to focus exclusively on performance, and they realized, hey, we're the ultimate driving machine. And we drove home for the next 10 years that the focus should be on performance and only on performance. Everything else was secondary because that's what they were known for. And the other thing that's really interesting about this is these are what we say are compelling truths of brands. And a brand is best when it's telling what people believe what people believe is a compelling truth for the brand, not necessarily what might or might not be true. There are credible truths that you can tell if you're close enough to the leader in that category, but there are compelling truths where you stand out. You're the best in class in that category, and certainly I would say in that example that's one of them. Now I'll go into the real data as opposed to my storytelling. One of the things we like to point out is the numbers on here. Here's a very simple graph, not really. What an interesting aside to this graph is that internally we had a lengthy discussion as to how do you present this graph? What does the 293% mean, and what does the 214% mean? Well, 293% is the growth of the top 10 firms in our Simplicity Index that are publicly traded, how much they've grown over the course of the last 9 years. The average for the Dow Jones Industrial Index is 78%. So our simple firms have grown by 214 percentage points more than the index. So that's my simple way of explaining it. Loyalty is also up for these particular brands. They're 69% more loyal, and they can charge a 63% premium. We find that of people that find companies simple, they're 38% more likely to recommend that brand. We also find that 70% of people who find or are willing to pay more, 70% are more willing to recommend a simple brand than others, which is why you saw the fast growth of Apple, the fast growth of Uber, the fast growth of a number of disruptive technologies. One of the things that we see that I think is really pretty fascinating is that the industries don't stack up evenly across the different markets that we study. You can see that banking, which is in the middle of the board, I believe, does fairly well. Well, doesn't do fairly well, but does particularly poorly in China, for example. Well, I would wonder why that might be the case. Or is it China? No, it's in Mexico, excuse me. And basically that's because many of the people in Mexico still consider the banks to be corrupt, which is a problem for them. But you can see also there's minor differences across the board. One of the things I find really interesting is that internet search and internet retail is considered to be a very simple type of industry. But when you go to social media, it's like nearly way down the list at 17, social media. So it's not simple, yet we find a lot of people use it. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about when I go into US brands is I'll talk a little bit about some of the social media information that we gathered from people in terms of what they're using, how they're using, why they're using it. So when we take a look at the US brands, and our global brands aren't too different than the US brands. When we look at the top 3 in global, you find that Google is bracketed by Lidl and Aldi, a couple of supermarket retail chains, which is rather interesting. Otherwise, everything falls out pretty similarly. You also see that there's a lot of fast food chains here, convenience eating chains that people find simple. KFC is a fast grower. Pizza Hut, Dunkin' Donuts, and Burger King, all way up there in terms of simplicity. When we take a look at some of the brands that aren't so good at simplicity, it's not surprising to see that these tend to be insurance brands. They tend to be insurance and they tend to be satellite providers. It's really interesting to me that the satellite providers do so poorly on this. DirecTV, Dish, and all the rest end up really towards the bottom. You can see American Airlines is not a very strong performer either, being among the last in the United States in terms of ranking. One of the things one of the things I mentioned was that for each, the people that find a company simple, they're willing to pay more. But that varies based on what industry a company might be in or how that company is positioned. So some companies benefit more than others do in terms of providing a simple experience. So you can see companies that have high simplicity but can charge a high premium would include like Apple, Netflix, Dell, Samsung, companies that you would expect. Companies that have a low score that could get a high premium for simplicity are some of the companies that I've mentioned. BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Virgin Mobile, for example, or HTC. So it's kind of interesting in terms of people's willingness to pay for this simple experience and whether they perceive that they're getting it or not. Again, we'll find that if we were going to go to a more targeted sample, we might find these results being different. If we were to look at luxury automobile buyers, we might see a whole different score for BMW than going to the general market like we have here. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the social results that we did. I know that you've seen a lot of stuff about social media today and yesterday, and you'll see some more tomorrow, I expect. Social media being like the end topic that we all want to know more about. We wanted to as well. And so part of what we wanted to understand was how are people using social media in their day-to-day world? What are they using it for? And how does simplicity relate to that? And you can see here that the most prevalent use for it is finding sources of entertainment. Is that the simplest? Not necessarily. The simplest is actually connecting with friends and family. But those are the 2 leading things that people are using it for. They're not necessarily using it to engage customer service, but those that do find it rather simple. So when we take a look at connecting with friends and family and coworkers, what activities do people find simple? You see that younger people find assessing celebrities and getting updates from brands much simpler than the older demographic, which is not too unexpected, I don't think. And learning about brands and products and services, what are people looking for? Where is their discovery going? You can see that Facebook and Pinterest are the most used for product discovery, but in terms of making it simple, that's Pinterest alone. Really has a sharp spike in that area. Staying up to date in the news, I think this is kind of interesting, especially given our latest news about how Facebook does its trending and how other companies are doing their trending of the various news. And the more people that are going and using online for news services and social media for news services. Twitter is the simplest platform for keeping up on current events, but respondents are more likely to follow a brand on Facebook, which is not too surprising. And you can see that they also follow brands on Instagram, which is why when you're looking at social media platforms, it's really important that they somehow track Instagram either through a hashtag method or through some of the more visual-centric approaches that we're seeing today. So I'm going to take a look at some of the, take a little deep dive into an area which we typically do in some of the different conferences that we go to, and talk about shipping and mail. And I'm doing that because this is the home of UPS, United Parcel Service, and so I think it's particularly relevant. When we take a look at shipping and mail, you can see that this includes such brands as DHL, FedEx, UPS, and the United States Postal Service, particularly in the United States. So for shipping and mail, FedEx is number one globally, not too surprisingly. But UPS dominates in the United States in terms of simplicity. So globally, FedEx, everybody sees FedEx as the clear leader, followed by DHL and then UPS, and you can see their rank up there. But then secondarily, in the US only, UPS really runs everything because that's how a lot of things are shipped in our country, and it's a little more germane to everyone. So what are the reasons that drive some of this? We also obtain from our people specific information about why they find a process simple or why they found it particularly complex. And you can see in this instance, the respondents told us that UPS is easy, it's reliable and helpful, but not always. There are some instances of bad customer service, or when they lose a package, it's difficult to get. Those people are going to be difficult to satisfy. When we take a look at FedEx, they can be more complicated, but they're certainly less efficient than UPS. UPS is pretty much omnipresent in the US. FedEx is as well, but people are seeing it as a much more corporate, much more global enterprise, particularly in the United States. They feel that they have to ask multiple questions to know what they need for shipping to different things, because there are so many different services that are available from FedEx nowadays that they didn't always have before. It used to be there, get it overnight, and that was it. And that was great for all of us who used to have to send things over the fax machine or other methodologies that we used to use back in the golden dark ages that we were in. One of the last things that we see, and we see this when we're looking at simplicity research across the broad board of all companies and all industries, is that bureaucracy and poor customer service threaten simplicity. These are examples from the shipping and the mail side of the business, but I see throughout this there's a common thread that if you have poor customer service, you have poor customer experiences, you increase bureaucracy, make people go from one person to the next person. How many of you have ever gone on the phone and called into a customer service line and had someone say, oh, well, I can't help you with that, you're going to have to talk to this person. And then you go to that person and you talk to them and they say, oh, no, I'm not the right person, you have to go to this person. So then you go to that person and they send you back to the first person. It's like, no, that's not going to work out very well. And that happens more often than we like to think. And so that's really where we end up with. If you go to the simplicityindex.com, you can get the results of the whole study, all the different markets, all the different places. Remember, simplicity is your friend, and that's where you want to go. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay. So who has some questions for David? Anyone?
Pardon me?
We've got a mic coming towards you. We should just keep one up at this table.
How many, pardon me?
Can you tell me how the IRS rates in the simplicity scale?
We don't actually measure the IRS, but I can tell you that as a company, we actually worked with the IRS in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and helped them develop the 1040EZ form. And so we do a lot of form simplification and other methods that we've applied. So we have worked with them and helped them. They haven't come to us lately, though, and maybe they should.
Any questions?
Any other questions? None.
Well, I've got one here. So how does the Simplicity Index compare to other measures of brand equity?
That's always a good question.
Is it?
One of the interesting things is that everybody puts out a brand equity measurement or a reputation measurement or something else. Typically, those are based on revenues, they're based on finances, they're based on a number of different other factors that relate to brand equity. All we're looking at here is simplicity. We do tie into the fact of, if you're simple, can you gain more revenue? Yes, you can. And can we quantify that? Yes, we can. But it's going to, as I showed you earlier, it's going to differ for each individual company. It's going to differ for each individual industry. And a company's individual simplicity score is going to be based on that industry score and their individual score. So there are two components to it. One thing that I can also provide to you if you want, I've got a 7-question Excel file. So if you want to test how simple is our company compared to other companies in the world, you can fill it in on a 1 to 10 scale, answer 7 questions, and get a simplicity index score for your company. I've used this with companies a number of times where they wanted to see how simple they were. They had a marketing team that was working on this. They distributed it out to the whole team, put the answers together, came up with a mean, and created a simplicity index based on what their management thought that they could do. And if you want, if you give me a business card, I'll be sure to send you that Excel file. That'd be easy to do. And it's a fun thing to have.
Okay. Any further questions? All right. Well, thank you for sharing this stuff. Wait, no, we have a question.
One lady.
Rock on. Go ahead.
So you said earlier that if a brand is simpler, they could charge more, right?
Yeah.
So the Burger King was on the top quadrant of the map, if
Right.
I'm not mistaken. So are you suggesting that they can actually charge more for a burger than McDonald's or however, whatever, Wendy's? So doesn't that matter, like the taste and customer service? What about all the other stuff that makes the brand the brand?
And that's good. That's an example of a company that has a high score but a low premium. So simplicity is important in that marketplace, as you saw by a lot of their competitors being among the leading firms in that arena. McDonald's is a perennial top performer in our simplicity index. But those firms cannot necessarily charge a premium because of the intensity of the competition within that industry. Where, as I showed in other industries, like in the car industry, where BMW has a relatively low score, they could actually charge more for their already expensive cars by providing a simplified experience. And that's true not just for BMW, but throughout the automotive industry. Car buying is a pain for everybody, and it's not the most simplest of processes. And I think there's an opportunity there for major disruption in terms of coming in with an easy, simple process. We've seen Tesla kind of do that and creating a different kind of experience for people. And I kind of like what they've done, but I hesitate to jump on the bandwagon of a company that has yet to show more than 2 consecutive quarters of profit. And so when they do that, then I'll jump on the bandwagon.
How long have you been doing this study?
This study has been going on for 6 years now.
Okay.
So we have 6 years of data. We always do a deep dive on something different. This last year we did social media. Next year we're going to be focusing on employee engagement and the relationship between employee engagement and simplicity. So it should be interesting.
Really interesting.
Okay?
More questions? All right.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you, David.